Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Small History Podcast. Today, I will be discussing another part of my trip, day 2 of the 21 days in Japan, where I'll be discussing Senso-Ji Temple, Ueno Park, and the Japan National Museum. I scheduled this itinerary for the second day of my trip, as they're all fairly close to where I was staying in Akihabara. As you can see here, Senso-Ji Temple is about 3 kilometers to the northeast of where I was staying, and Ueno Park is another approximate 3 kilometers west. If you remember back in the last episode where I was talking about my arrival, you can see Ueno Station right here where I departed, so that's approximately 1.5 kilometers. So in terms of the distance, it's probably roughly around 10k to walk the entire loop around. So, to talk about Senso-Ji Temple, the first stop on this trip. So, the proper full name of the temple is Kinryuzan Senso-Ji, and sometimes it's also known as the Asakusa Kannon Temple. As you can see, I've broken up the kanji here. So you have Kinryuzan, which kin is the kanji for gold, Ryu, kanji for dragon, and Yama, the kanji for mountain. Senso, meaning the white characters there, and then Ji, meaning temple. And if you want a comparison, this is the kanji for shrine, jinja. So you have Ji, temple, and jinja, shrine. And then here as well, you also have it shown here, Asakusa Kannon. The name Kannon is representative of the bodhisattva that is there. Kannon is the bodhisattva of mercy, compassion, and salvation. So to compare it, Senso-Ji is a Buddhist temple, whereas the Yasukuni shrine we looked at previously is a Shinto shrine. And there are some notable differences. One of the things I will preface is that a lot of times when you go to Buddhist temples, you might have to pay an entrance fee that you don't at a Shinto shrine. It all depends on where you go, but I found, generally speaking, a lot of the Shinto shrines are free admission, whereas a lot of the Buddhist temples will have an admission fee. But this one at Senso-Ji is not. You do not have to pay. The other thing to point out is that with that suffix Ji, it already is saying Senso Temple. In translation, so if you say Senso-Ji Temple, you're saying temple twice, but I'll probably do it anyways. So, to talk about the origins of this place, Senso-Ji was established in approximately the year 645 in its first iteration. The temple has gone through multiple transformations over events that have caused damage to the shrine and its buildings. Like anything that old and made predominantly out of wood, there's been fires. There was obviously a Second World War, resulted in the destruction of a lot of Japanese shrines in major cities like Tokyo. But this goes further back. There were many instances of war. There are shrines and temples being burned in the process. The origins of this shrine date all the way back to 628, where two brothers supposedly fished the statue out of the Sumida River. And 20 years later, in 645, the temple was built to house the statue that was fished out. It was apparently a really small statue, supposedly around 6 centimeters tall. During this time, in 645, the statue was designated as a Hibutsu image, which meant that the statue was sacred, and so it was concealed from public view. So only people with direct connections to the monastery, monks or priests, would have access to worshiping the statue. The general public was not allowed to see the statue. About 100 years, 200 years later, 150 years later, the Buddhist priest Enin, also known as Jikaku Daishi, visited the Senso-Ji shrine and carved a Midachi statue to worship in place of the Hibutsu statue. As well as, in addition to the main palace, there is a pagoda, and there are two sets of gates that you go through when approaching from the south, like I did. You have the Thunder Gate, the Kaminarimon, and the Hozomon, the Treasure House Gate. The Kaminarimon is the south gate that is depicted here in this image, and in it there are two guardian statues that you can kind of see through the meshing to the left and the right of the giant lantern. The two gods are Fujin and Raijin, the gods of wind and thunder, that are to protect the entryway into the grounds. There is also a large lantern, a Chochin lantern, in the middle, and it is approximately 4 meters tall and weighs about 1,500 pounds. There are also two other statues at the back of the Kaminarimon, the Kaminarimon, as well as the two that are in the Hozomon. In this image here, we have the inner gate, the Hozomon gate, and as you can see, there are the two statues, the two guardian statues on either side here and here, and there are 3 lanterns instead of 1 that's in the Kaminarimon. The middle lantern here bears the inscription Kobunacho, in honor of the people community of Kobunacho that donated 5 million yen to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the Edo period in the year 2003. In addition, you have 2 smaller lanterns, one on either side, and then you have the Neomon statues that are depicted here on these sides that are the guardians of the Hozomon. Now, although the temple was established at approximately 645, the first documented account of the existence of the temple was in an 1181 Kamakura period chronicle, and it wasn't until 1590 when Tokugawa Ieyasu, a really important leader of Japan, one of the last of the 3 great unifiers, and shogun for close to almost 300 years, designated as an official place of prayer for the shogunate. It is the oldest shrine in Tokyo and one of the oldest in all of Japan. And as I mentioned before, it's been rebuilt numerous times due to fires, wars, earthquakes, other incidents. In terms of the age of the structures today, the main hall was rebuilt following the Second World War from 1951 to 1958, the Kaminarimon Gate in 1960, the Hozomon Gate in 1964, and the pagoda in 1973. So let's talk a little bit about my visit there and some of the experiences. So there is a shopping district in between the 2 gates before you get to the main temple. It's called the Nakamise, and it is kind of like a big vendor area where you can wander in between the stores, and they sell all the things you can expect, the knickknacks and souvenirs. You can buy fans, you can buy clothing, whether it's t-shirts or more traditional Japanese kimono style outfits, and as well there's a lot of food that you can buy, a lot of things like yakiniku, food on skewers, and other kind of treats like that, fried foods that you would expect at like a vendor stall. Another thing that's really popular is the fortunes. So in these 3 images I've shown here, I have example of what the fortune process is like. You pay 100 yen, you shake this tin that's there, and you lean it where the hole is as you pull a stick out. The stick contains a number on it. You put the stick back in the container, you don't take it with you, so the next person can shake it up. Whatever number you get, in my case it was 77, so you'd go to the drawer and you would claim your fortune, number 77. And in my case, I got a bad luck fortune, which to my knowledge represents more than half of the fortune numbers there. And as you can see, you get a little quote: everything stays in sick without progress. If you want to let other people know your name or try to get good fortune, never desire what beyond you control. So, and then there's some little tips if you're into this kind of zodiac type um, beliefs. There's that you can go on and use as advice for the remainder of your trip. Now, when you get good fortune, you often will keep the fortune with you as a sign of good luck. If you have a bad fortune, it's there are these posts that are right beside it that you are supposed to tie your fortune to, like I did there. You fold it up and you tie it to the post, and that is supposed to leave the bad luck at the shrine there, and that way it does not follow you for the rest of your trip. Next here, we have some images of some of the sites at the main shrine. I did not include any photos inside the shrine itself. In general, you are not supposed to take photos of the Buddha statues inside the shrine. From what I remember, there was almost 2 layers inside the shrine. So there's kind of an outer layer, and then there's an inner sets of doors you can go through. I do not know personally whether it was something you pay to go inside or um, you have access to as a membership or anything like that. But there's donation boxes. Typically, what you'll do is you'll bow twice, you put your money in the donation box, you clap your hands twice, you say a prayer, whether it's reciting part of a sutra or just reciting it on your own, and then you bow again twice and you leave. And there's a couple images around here. One thing I did want to point out is that you will see the Buddhist swastikas that are there, and I just want to preface that this has no association with the Nazis and the Second World War. This is something that is part of Buddhist traditions, goes back for more than 2,000 years. It is a sign of good luck and prosperity, and it is something that is common. If you look for it, there are a lot in the Senso-Ji temple, but it's not common everywhere. So just as a forewarning, you will see that sign if you wander around. Among here, there are some other plaques, some statues, a lot of obviously of Buddhist statues around, um, which is really cool and fascinating to see. Inside the main temple, you can pray to the Maidichi Kannon statue, and the grounds are also home to things like Japan's national treasures, the Hokkekyo Sutras, which is a series of 10 scrolls that date back to the 11th century. One way I like to think of these scrolls, for instance, the Lotus Sutra is one of the most famous versions of the sutra. It's a Buddhist scroll. It's like an equivalent to a tome of the Catholic Bible, and in the same way that if you're a Christian, you might pray while uh, praying the Lord's Prayer or Hail Mary or something like that. You can recite a passage of the sutra. The Lotus Sutra, for example, is anywhere from 350 to 500 pages long. When translated, about 90,000 words in 28 chapters, about 6 hours to read. To go back to the vase, this specific type of vase is known as a manji, and it's Yeah, it often you'll see these manji with full of sand, and they're often a spot where people will put incense while making prayers to departed loved ones or to honor the Kanon statue itself. One nice thing about it too is that the grounds are fairly large here. As I mentioned, there is a shopping district in between the two sets of gates, but there's also a giant pagoda just to the west. I don't believe I included it in this slideshow, but I have it in the previous slideshow, so you can look for it there. There's also a lot of natural green space around it, which is one thing I found really nice because of the size of all these temple grounds. Even in a big place like Tokyo, you can find a good amount of parkland that you can just kind of relax and enjoy and walk around. There's, you can see here, there's a nice little creek that runs by and a bunch of koi fish swimming inside. Um, there's also a lot of smaller Buddha statues that are often tied with families, and even while they look like they're really old, and you might think, oh, who's gonna pray to them? When I walked around, there were a lot of people who did go to some of these smaller statues and are making prayers to ancestors, to loved ones, as part of a daily or a weekly ritual, which I thought was really interesting. But if you do go around, there is a lot that you can explore. As I mentioned, you have the Nakamise district directly to the south, but you also have other shopping districts to the west. I was here for roughly around 2 hours early in the morning, from around 7 till around 9, before I began making my way west towards the National Museum. But there's if you are more interested, there's a lot more time to walk around and things to see. If you can kind of see beyond the Buddha statue to the left, there there were a bunch of kind of temporary stands similar to what you would see at a carnival, something like the CNE, where you can get um, more fried or barbecued foods that are grilled outdoors. There was also a roofed shopping district to the west that you can go to as well. That has the similar kinds of shopping souvenirs that you could see in the south. So, following my time in Senso-Ji, I made my way 2 kilometers west to the Tokyo National Museum. The Tokyo National Museum is in part of Ueno Park, so this whole green space here is what consists of Ueno Park. In the north here, you have a little cemetery, and then in the northwest here, you have what is left of the Toezan Kaneji Indo-in. Kaneji is the site of Ueno Park. It was originally a temple, and if you remember in the image I showed last episode of the Battle of Ueno, that's actually where the Battle of Ueno takes place, in this Ueno Park, and the Kaneji temple grounds. So what happened was it was destroyed during the Meiji Restoration, and it was later this whole area was later transformed into a public park. There are several museums around here. There's a museum of nature and science. There's a couple of art museums and exhibition halls. And of course, in the southern portion here, there's the park, the zoo, and then you have the National Museum, which is one of Japan's largest museum sites in the country. You walk through here, you get a nice view of the railroad tracks as well, which is this, bring it up again, my pointer, this right over here where I crossed. So you have a really cool view of the railroad tracks making your way into Ueno Station. So here is the Ueno Park looking right in front of the Tokyo National Museum. So you have the museum right here. As I mentioned before, the museum was first established in 1872 at the former site of the Kaneji Temple, which is a bit older, around 1625, so a difference of around 250 years. There are 6 separate buildings that exist on the site of the Tokyo National Museum, but the main two are the Honkan and the Toyokan. And I'll get more to that in a little bit. Okay, language-wise, so the full name is Tokyo National Museum or Tokyo Kokoritsu Hakabutsukan. Tokyo, the first two characters represented here. Then you have the three characters that represent Kokoritsu, which translates to National Institute, and the last two, Hakabutsukan, which translates to museum. So, Tokyo National Institute Museum or Tokyo National Museum. And again, this is that image that I showed before. So, this Battle of Ueno, 1868. That's how later, by 1872, you have the establishment of the Hyokeikan, and later the Honkan and the Toyokan. So the image here, a bit more up close, you have the Honkan, which is considered the main exhibit hall where most of the Japanese artifacts are put on display. To the right here, I didn't take a picture of it in focus, but to the right here is the Toyokan, which is the Asian Arts Gallery. And this contains most of the other artifacts that are, focused on the rest of Asia. So you have China, Korea, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, India, and Egypt, and you have a little bit of Europe as well. But the majority of it is the rest of Asia. So talking a little bit, going into the Toyokan, that is where I visited first. Outside, kind of where the water fountains are in the pond that I showed earlier in the image, outside of the entrance to the museum, you have this statue on the left that is as a tribute to Hideo Noguchi, a really important scientist in Japanese history. He was the guy who found the bacteria that was related to the cause of syphilis, and was played a major role in the advancement of science, Western science and medicine in Japan. He continues to be featured on the 1,000 yen banknotes. Over to the right here, you have a couple of Buddhist statues from China and I believe Tibet, so kind of the southwestern part of China. From what I remember, they were predominantly carved out of limestones and other soft sandstones. Over here, you have an image of an Egyptian mummy as part of the collection in the Toyokan. Over here, you have some various artifacts, metal and bronze artifacts that come from some parts of Asia and some parts of Europe. Here you also have some Stone Age era arrowheads, and some of them date back tens of thousands of years back. As you can also see here, there's also some images of them that are, as they would look, attached to handles that of course have decomposed and rotted off, but elements of the arrowheads and the metals still exist. Lots of bowls, practical elements. There is a Korean exhibit that has a lot of Korean fans, Korean dress, China dress. There's also a lot of scrolls and patterns of cloth. I found, from what I observed, there wasn't much that goes beyond the year 600. By the time you get around there, I think that's where you start to get into the decomposition of materials. But it's still really impressive to see how they are preserved. And there's a lot of artifacts, like I mentioned before, boxes, bowls, cups. It really resembles the collection at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. If you haven't been there, it's a very good comparison on the type of artifacts that are on display, and very similar to that respect. And you also have some artworks and paintings, again, often inscribed on cloth. One thing that I do want to know is that there are a lot of collections that belong to the museum that are permanently on display here, but there are also a lot of temporary exhibits that are donated by members of the outside community. And as something important to note, a lot of times when those artifacts are put on display, they actually put a request that they do not get photographed or recorded. So there are a lot of times where you'll look at something, and there will be a volunteer or a member of the museum that's there that is strictly there to keep you from taking photos of certain artifacts. Um, if you venture downstairs, I found there were a lot more of the larger, heavier artifacts on temporary display. There were things like some of the bronze bells or drum sets and things of that nature, and some other types of scrolls or facades that were folding screens that were not accessible to the public to take photos of. You could look at it and appreciate it while you're there, but you could not take a photo of it and take it with you. When you get then into the Hong Kong, the main gallery, that's where I found you get a lot more of a directed sort of chronological walk through the history of Japan. If you go to the Toyokan first, I found it was very much more separated geographically. So when you first go in on the ground floor, you have a lot of the Buddhist statues that come out of Tibet and southern China. And then as you kind of wander around, you have like, okay, here's the part of stuff from Egypt, from India, from Southeast Asia. It's and you have to go, it's very elevated, it's among 5 floors. The Hong Kong, the main gallery, is more chronological in that sense, so it really tells a more thorough story of the history of Japan, floor by floor. And as you go through separate exhibit halls that contain everything on display. So, but some of the images I'm showing are not necessarily in chronological order, and often you have it in a little bit of themes of culture or during warfare. So, for instance, the samurai period, you have a lot of samurai swords that are manufactured from the Sengoku era and uh, and the unification period up to the establishment of the Tokugawa. So you have a lot of that. Other artifacts you have too is you have some additional Buddha statues that are put on display. This is a really cool example of one where you have the statue there, but you also have the vessel that's often put in display. And but in this case, to showcase the artwork around it, the statue's been removed so you can see the artwork in the panels inside. And you either get ones like these that are very artistically decorated, but sometimes you also get ones that are maybe a bit more simple in design, but they often have a lot more gold in them and are more elaborately decorated. Another thing too you will see is that there is a very big blend of old and new. When you head into the early parts of the museum, you get a lot of the Jomon or Yayoi or Kofun period statues. There's a lot of these clay statues, artifacts like this one here, which I believe is one from the Jomon period, so one of the oldest ones. And to put a little bit of reference or sort of modern pop culture spin on it, you have one of the souvenir plushies of this guy here that is sort of meant to represent one of these Yayoi period statues. And if you've played anything like from Nintendo, you get a lot of references like this of Japanese culture in their games. For example, Animal Crossing has the gyroid figures that are resemble the design of one of these Jomon statues. So that was really cool to see. And then what's really neat I found when you get to the end of the exhibit, you have a exhibit that is dedicated specifically towards the preservation and how sort of puts you in the perspective of a museum curator or an archaeologist and how they go about preserving the materials that they find in the shrines. It talks about all the kinds of ways you can use X-rays and materials to determine the age of it, how fragile something is, how you go about restoring it, the type of lacquer that's used, how the pigmentation has eroded over time, um, how what colors the pigments might have been in, where it has changed. Maybe something was, for example, bronze has a tendency to rust or to turn a greenish color. So how do you envision it might have looked like when it was in its original state before it suffered from erosion? In ways of how you preserve, say, the luster of the samurai swords I depicted earlier. Some other images that were shown that were really cool. There are a couple of scrolls here that I've shown. So the middle one is an early encyclopedia, a bug encyclopedia. So you have a scroll that enlists all the different insects. The artist here has drawn the caterpillars through kind of their life cycle and has shown them in their larva stage and as a pupa and how it looks attached to tree branches. So there's things of that nature. On the left side, you have a tremendously large scroll. This is only a portion of it, and even when it's on display in the museum, it's not fully unrolled. They gradually shift it or unroll it, kind of page by page, if you can imagine, over time, over a series of weeks and months. And this depicts the route from, I believe, from Osaka to Kyoto, sorry, to Tokyo. So you have the full route of the main pathway, and you have all the little stations depicted of where the outposts are for the purposes of mail delivery, for messengers, and for just security for scouts along the pathway, which was really cool. And then on the right side here, there you start to touch in with more elements of modernity. You start to see kind of the mixture of East and West culture. You have a couple of Sika deer here, which make up the majority of the deer in Ueno Park. So you have statues like these, but you also have a lot more of kind of Victorian elements. You start to see the clash of sort of traditional Japanese kimono style dresses, and you start to get more of like the Victorian era of dress and suits that start to permeate Japan. And two, in the whole site of the Tokyo National Museum, you have the mix in the establishment of more Western style architecture. Another scroll here you have of the I believe it's the No theater. So you have this as well in the Tokugawa period. So you have a really cool blend that covers everything from these early Jomon Yayoi Kofun periods. You have elements of Nara and Heian Kamakura culture, where you start seeing a lot more of it fusing with China in the Nara period, and less so in the Han period, as it starts to kind of put on its own Japanese twist on Chinese culture. And then you really start to get a second semblance of that in the Tokugawa period. You have the Sengoku era with all the fighting, and then the modernity in the Meiji Restoration. And it tends to kind of lean away from talking too much about more contemporary history. That's left something more like the Yasukuni Shrine Museum. To talk about the Hyokekan, this is it here. This is to the left, so if I was turning to the right, you would have my earlier image of the Honkan. The Hyokekan is the oldest building here, which was established in 1909, and then you have the other two buildings established a little bit later. I believe the Honkan is in the early 1900s, and I think you get to the 1930s for the Toyokan. So after that, after spending about, I think it was at 9 o'clock, so I was probably there till around 1. Then I spent the rest of my afternoon wandering through Ueno Park. As I mentioned before, Ueno is a public park, and it was established in 1873 after the Meiji Restoration, and it consists of these museums, zoo, the public park. Um, there's also a moniker um, for the area. It's known as the Demon Gate, um, because of all the warfare that took place in the Battle of Ueno. It's known as the Demon Gate, and I believe that the northeast, as it is northeast of the Edo Castle, it is considered by some to be a demon gate, or maybe a cursed area for that name as well. Following the Second World War, this park area it became a little bit destitute, and it was a bit of a prominent site of um, illicit drug trade and prostitution. Kind of makes sense then when you look at sort of what happened to the south of it in Akihabara and Electric Town. There's very similar elements there, and even today, sometimes Ueno Park can be seen as a bit of a squatter site. But in from my visit, I was really impressed with it. It was everything was kept really clean. It was a very nice public park. If you go to the east side, there's some baseball diamonds near it, um, in the park, I should say. And then there's also all these museums. So it's a nice mix of natural space, but as well as having things like zoos and museums to be able to visit for the public. In the south area, kind of near the station as you go into, there's a really nice area for some more pop-up shops. There's more stands, and while I was there, because it was in November, late November, you started to have the Christmas events going on. So you have this giant Santa statue, among others, where people are posing to take photos, and you had all these themed shops that were selling Christmas beer and other kind of winter holiday themed treats around it. The other thing too, I didn't visit this shrine, but there is also to the western portion the Ueno Toshogu, which is a Shinto shrine that is an enshrinement of Tokugawa Ieyasu, where he has the name Tosho Daigongen. So after all that, it was probably around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I did some more traveling. I ate some more curried udon, which was delicious. And then I did some shopping, some more browsing around. Akihabara is a place that, as I mentioned before, is well known for all of its anime stuff. Lots and lots of books to choose from to shop through, whether it's manga um, or I guess more conventional books, novels, history books, things like that. One store in particular I want to point out was Yodobashi Camera, which is really popular. It is kind of your equivalent of your Walmart department store. You go in, there's 7 floors to go from, and it has all your consumer goods, whether it's be your washing machine, your air conditioner, your showers, your televisions, your dryers, your cameras, obviously. But then there's also a lot of toys and games. So as you see here on the image, kind of to the left half, I looked at some of the Tamiya warship models, and they have all different kinds of ones to choose from. They also have your Gundam style figures, tanks, remote controlled cars. They had your video game sections. There was a complete section set just for Nintendo and just for Sony, and pretty much anything electronic that you can think of, you can imagine. Phones, headphones, power banks, yeah, and anything, computer sets, modules, all your components from your motherboards to fans to power supplies, all of that stuff. And then, of course, a lot of other shops in the area also had all your anime related merch. What I found was really interesting going to some of them, they're often sorted by the types of manga. So you have like your Shonen Jump, which is like your kind of um, teenager manga, things like Dragon Ball and things like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, stuff like that. And then you've got sections that are just dedicated to like yaoi or yuri, like girls love or boys love manga where it's targeted to a specific audience, so you have kind of separate floors. What really speaks to me is that they're very much the buildings are very much separated vertically, so you might not have a ton of floor space on each individual floor, but rather than say in Canada, for instance, where there you have your storefront is just the first floor, and then there might be residences on the second floor up. You have the entire set of 7 or 8 floors that are all dedicated to the store, and then there might be one or two floors at the very top that are separated for storage. And some buildings did have elevators, but there are a lot that did not. So if accessibility, mobility is an issue, you may find a challenge in some of the smaller stores. The big department stores like Yodobashi had, I think, 4 elevators and escalators for the entire way up, but some of the smaller ones you might be have an issue if you have a difficulty taking stairs. But all the merchandise there's everything you can think of, from like keychains to books to CDs to the figures like the ones that I have here in the image to the right. Some of these ones are actually only display models because they've sold out of them, but you can find ones that are as low as 20 or $30, as high as several hundred. Um, One of the things you will find is that sometimes the exclusivity is still a problem here in Japan, as as it is here in the West. If you're trying to order something having it shipped, you may not necessarily save a whole ton as what you might think, but you do have that peace of mind of once you buy it here directly, your concerns of just getting it through customs, I found, became a lot easier, as opposed to ordering something and then having to worry about it shipping, whether it gets snagged by a porch pirate or damaged in transit. Um, as for some of the build it figures, like the ones I have here depicted, um, the Yubari one I have here, for example, it was, I think, around 1,200 yen, so like $12. Whereas I was looking on Amazon and it was anywhere from 22 to $30 Canadian. So figures like these you do save on, especially the Tamiya ones. I found you were getting almost half price in some circumstances compared to the prices now being shipped. But do be aware that some of the other ones, especially a lot of the Gundam style ones, are still incredibly expensive, even in Japan. As for things like video games, I didn't buy anything out there um, of that nature, because I believe that for some of the Switch stuff now it is restricted to the region. So if you can't play like a Japanese one on a Western Switch or vice versa. So you might run into those problems there. But people who all I say is do your research, because if you're going there to buy specific video games, it's up to you. The burden's on you. If you know what you're planning on getting, do that research. And yeah, right here, so I have an image of some of the graphics cards. So like you have i9 processors that are selling for $1,000, for instance. There, like this Intel Core one, 100,000 yen is about $1,000. You have a simpler i3 one for around 150. Some other ones here. So you're not really supposed to take photos of all these images, but I did want to show a couple just so you can kind of get a glimpse of what it looks like. But yeah, there are sales associates on pretty much every department and every floor, which is nice. Some of the smaller ones, you often have to pay on each specific floor you're on, so you're that way you're not trafficking goods up and down each floor. And always just keep a hand of your receipts. That's often a safe go. I was traveling with my backpack and I had no issues of being stopped or searched or questioned, accused of anything, which was good. There's also a number of arcade machines in Akihabara as well. I don't have pictures here, but I'll have pictures later. So there's a lot of claw games and things you can play. On upper floors is usually where they have all the sort of karaoke machines and stuff like that, and rhythm games and other things of that nature. So then to conclude, I closed my night off after walking around for probably around 3 or 4 hours in Akihabara. I concluded with a different drink and ramen. So this one of the nice things here, there's sometimes more what you might think of as hole in the wall type ramen shops, but That's absolutely not the case once you step inside. This bowl of ramen with a huge amount of pork was around $10. So if you like ramen, you can be very adventurous and try all these different kinds of things. And rather than to conclude my beverage of choice of this night, I went with the Suntory Highball. So rather in North America, where you might find the alcoholic content of beverages capping out around 6%, you can get these whiskey highballs, literally just whiskey and soda, Suntory whiskey, that top out at around 9%. And I believe this was, depending on which store you go into, you can get them from 250 yen to 300 yen, so 250 to $3 Canadian, which is a nice bargain. So to conclude, I think what might be a bit beneficial going forward is I'll put some of the sites on as a timeline so you can get really an appreciation of the age of these. So Senso-Ji you have as the earliest site I visited so far at 650 AD. You have the Asakuni Shrine established in 1869, and later the Tokyo National Museum in 1872. And then Narita Airport in 1978. I did include that there. As I get more and more, I will expand on this timeline, and hopefully by the end, this will be up to, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 pages of slides on the timeline. That way, kind of get a better understanding and appreciation for exactly where we are. I know I found at the time, the moment of each, it could be really difficult to be like, okay, this is one shrine with some Buddha statues. Oh, this is another shrine with Buddha statues. It's 100 years older or younger, but so what? Well, this way, by putting it on timeline, hopefully it gets a little bit of context to the age of these things, and helps map it out not only through geography but through time. As I mentioned before, a lot of history and what historians do is placing things in the context of time, and where you see a lot of similarities in different eras as much as some of the differences in culture. So I want to thank you for listening to my talk today on these two shrines. I will have more content coming up in the very near future. My next one is going to be a kind of a very different tangent, where I will be looking at my trip in the next 2 days, the weekend, to the Tokyo racetrack in Fuchu, and my experiences looking at horse racing in Japan and the history behind that, and how it's sort of taken a popular resurgence through Uma Musume as one big anime component, but other elements of Japan popular culture. So look forward to sharing that in the next episode. If, as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the bottom. I will address the one that came in the last episode, but in a later time. I feel like it would be moot to try to answer that in a 1 minute segment. So take care, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next episode.